What's going on, guys? It's your boy Scrub here, back again with another video. Hope you guys are having a great day. I know I am, and today I've got two stories for you guys that are going to be harrowing tales of survival. People that were stranded at sea for insane spans of time. First up, we have Steve Callahan, who's a man known for surviving 76 days stranded at sea on a life raft. Basically, this guy, Steve Callahan, he was a little bit of a daredevil, a little bit of a guy who was always up for an adventure, and he wanted to participate in this sailing race. I guess it was a thing where you kind of had to make a boat or have one already made of a certain size to participate in this little race. And so he makes this little sailboat to participate in this race, but he ends up dropping out of the race in Spain. And he drops out of the race because there's been a bunch of bad weather, and it sinks a bunch of boats in the race, and it damages a bunch of others. And one of the ones that gets damaged and, can still float but not very well is his boat. So he drops out of the race in Spain, and right there he kind of makes some repairs to his boat, enough to continue the journey but not race, and he starts working his way down the coast of Spain and Portugal. And somewhere off the coast of Portugal, he becomes swamped because something in the middle of the night in a storm hits into his boat. And when something hits into his boat, it makes this hole and water starts flooding in. And the way that Steve had designed this boat, it had a bunch of sealed watertight compartments, so it wouldn't sink all the way, but it definitely isn't going to keep moving as a boat anymore. And so it kind of starts to sink, and he realizes that his chances aren't very good to get this going again, and he's probably going to have to abandon into his life raft. And so he spends the day kind of, taking in what's going on, understanding if there's anything he can do to fix the situation. And he's looking at this hole, and he thinks it could have been made by the middle of the night during the storm bumping into a whale, which would just really have to be the worst luck ever. All right, you've already been damaged by a storm once, but now on top of it, you literally have a hole in the side of your boat because you hit into a whale. Anyways, his boat's starting to take on more and more water because those watertight compartments are great, but over time they're kind of leaking. He finally decides to get in his life raft. So he gets into the life raft, and he keeps kind of diving back into the boat to get more and more stuff into the life raft. And he doesn't really get that much stuff. He gets an emergency kit containing some food, some charts, he gets a spear gun and a survival kit with flares, solar stills, all that good stuff. Everything you would expect to be in a life raft, and he finally just hops in and he finally pushes off. And so at this point, he's in his life raft, still kind of next to this half-sunken raft thing he's made, hoping that that would be easier for people to find him in. And right before dawn on the night he's sleeping in this life raft, there's this big wave in the sea, and it finally takes the boat all the way down to the bottom, and it pushes the life raft off to sea. And so he gets pushed off to sea, and he's just kind of drifting because you're in a life raft. There's really no way to control it. You can't sail. There's not an easy way to navigate in a life raft. And he starts having to ration all of his materials. He only had gotten a small amount of food in his sailboat, and that's gone relatively quickly. And after that's gone, he realizes that he has to start fishing to survive. So he uses the spear gun he found and some other things, and he starts literally catching fish out of his life raft to make sure that he can have enough sustenance to survive. And so he's out in the middle of the ocean, and he's eating mahi-mahi and triggerfish, which he spears. And along with fish, he starts to catch birds that would land on his raft to, have a place to sit in the ocean. Barnacles that had started to grow on his raft he would eat. And as I said in the beginning, he's out on the ocean for an insanely long time, 76 days. And when you're just drifting in the sea for 76 days, you have the ability to get into currents and just move insane distances. And so here he is in this life raft, right? Literally fishing over the side with a spear gun, capturing birds, drinking their blood. And during this, the sea is pushing him, and he ends up moving over 3,300 kilometers during this journey. So basically, almost circumnavigates the globe mile-wise while just sitting in this life raft, doing everything he can to survive. And while he's doing all of this, going these crazy distances, having the survival story, he's constantly trying to be rescued. It's not like he's not trying. He's using this emergency position radio thing, trying to signal a plane or something to come get him. And the flares that he had, he uses sparingly, but he's just not able to get anyone to notice him. And he really thought the radio beacon was going to work, but just simply, very unfortunately, at the time, satellites weren't looking for those emergency beacons. It wasn't something that they were able to pick up. So the only way that anyone would have found it is if they flew over him in a plane, right? But this guy's luck is so bad that he ends up in the most desolate part of the ocean where there's just nothing near him to pick up this signal. So he uses his flares, he's got this emergency radio beacon, and even with that, no one's able to find him. And to make matters worse, while he's drifting this 3,300 kilometers, he sees 9 ships. He ended up crossing 2 sea lanes, you know, but he's this tiny little life raft out on the ocean, and these are ginormous ships that he can barely see. There's no way that they're going to be able to see him. So he just kind of has to watch as these massive ships keep going past him. He's trying to signal him, he's screaming, but when you're out on the ocean and there's these insane distances, it's just easy to not get noticed. But even through all of this, most people would have given up, right? Like, man, personally, by the time the 9th ship just goes past me, I'm probably ready to call it a day, stop drinking bird blood for water. But he didn't. He was exercising the entire time. He was trying to navigate by the stars. He made repairs to his boat. He was fishing. He was improving water collection systems. Honestly, it was like he knew he was going to survive the whole time. That was his #1 priority. The way that he had stockpiled food and water was almost like, you know, it wasn't a matter of if he was going to get rescued, but when. And thankfully, because he's not giving up, on April 20th, 1982, he finally is in this spot, and he can see lights off of an island on this like little spot southeast of Guadalupe. And he starts kind of preparing to try to find a way to signal everybody that he's there, because he hasn't been able to see like lights on an island this entire time, and he can finally see civilization right there. And finally, the next morning, the 76th day that this guy is in this boat afloat on this raft, these fishermen just stumble upon him and pick him up. And the reason that they even notice that something's over there is they're like, there's a bunch of birds just like floating around this raft. And basically, because he had been in it for so long, there had been this little ecosystem developed around it, and so birds were drawn there. And they had just gone over to see what the birds were drawn to, and sure enough, here's this life raft that's been in the sea for 76 days. And so they get him on board and they start talking to him, and they can't believe this story, because he gets in, he says he's been afloat for 76 days, and over the 76 days, he's had to fight sharks, he's fixed his raft, he's had to replace equipment, you know, he's been exhausted, he's mentally stressed out, he's lost a third of his body weight, and he's covered with like sores of all these things, you know, sunburns, saltwater sores. And so they the fishermen realize, oh my gosh, this guy's not kidding, and they take him to a hospital. And he's only in the hospital for an evening. Like, after that, he leaves, he just starts to recover on the island, and he only spends a few weeks having to recover after this entire disaster before he decides to start hitchhiking on boats up through the West Indies. So yeah, basically this dude literally spent 76 days just drifting in the ocean, like just hell-bent on surviving, fishing, sustaining himself the entire time, and just honestly had to have been one of the most harrowing experiences of all time. And even after the fact, he wasn't that bitter about it. He even described the experience as like having a few positive elements, you know. He said the night sky was basically a view from heaven and a seat in hell, you know. And he still to this day sails the sea. He still like hasn't decided to give up boating at all. And yeah, since his survival drift, he hasn't really cared. He's been in plenty of offshore passages and ocean crossings, and most of them have been very small with like only a crew of 2 or 3 people. Next up, we're going to be talking about the story of Will Slattery, which is basically a guy who jumped out of a plane into the ocean and then survived for 24 hours stranded in the sea with like no boat. Just an absolute legend, and definitely deserves to have his story told. So it starts like this. Will Slattery and 5 other dudes decide that they want to go skydiving. You know, it's a great time. They're going to have this great view. Everything's going to be great. And somewhere in between takeoff and where they were supposed to be skydiving, there's this huge burst of plane turbulence, which leads to everybody just panicking. And somewhere in this panic, something happens that basically leaves them with 2 options. They can either go down with the plane that's now going down, or jump out of the plane, and because they were going to skydive, they've had parachutes on already. And the turbulence is really bad. Like, it's so bad to the point where the door is having a hard time opening on the plane, and all 6 people on the plane are trying to get this door open, and finally, after 4 tries, they get it open. The turbulence just keeps slamming it shut. And due to the turbulence, they don't really know their altitude, they don't know how high they are in the air, they don't really have time to like look and take stock of everything. They don't have time to look around and see what the conditions are. They just kind of have to be like jumping. And so Will jumps out of this plane, and he's just soaring through the sky. You know, everything's still kind of chaotic. He can't really tell where he is, and he's falling pretty quick. And after 8 seconds of being in the air, his automatic chute just pops. And when your automatic chute pops, pops, it means that you're traveling at an insanely fast velocity. And so his chute pops, and as soon as he's kind of falling slower, he starts looking around the sky, looking for everybody else from the plane that had jumped out. And he sees one of his friends, Jimmy, kind of gliding very, very far away really quickly. And so he keeps looking around, and his friend Manny is basically next to him, and they're kind of flying the same direction. And so he starts calling out to Manny to try to coordinate where they're going to land. And Manny, it looks like, had been knocked out by just the sheer G-force of the emergency chute pulling. Like, the force had kind of knocked him out because his head had kind of been limp and laying down like he was sleeping. And the chute had pulled, but it was like he wasn't awake. And so, obviously, the emergency chute triggers when you're going very quick. So he's still hurtling towards the ocean at 40 miles per hour, and he realizes that, like, most of my friends don't have a very good chance of making it out of here. And so he plummets into the ocean, and he kind of gets his chute off of him so it doesn't drag him down, and he gets kind of tied up in the cord of the parachute. So he's trying to stay calm while obviously being pulled down to the bottom of the ocean in a parachute, not the most relaxing thing ever. And piece by piece, he starts taking off all this gear, and it takes him 2 to 3 minutes of treading water while getting this off of him to finally get all of the wires and everything off of him. And so he's untangled, and it's at this point he realizes that the plane had crashed right behind him, because he turns around and he can see the wing kind of sticking out of the water where it had plummeted into the ocean. And so he realizes that, all right, the plane's down, I got the parachute off me, now I'm gonna go try to find anybody. So he takes off his shirt, he takes off his shoes so he can swim a little bit better, and he starts going to try to find Manny, the guy that had passed out in the air, see if he can, maybe find him, he's floating or something. He thinks maybe if he gets to him quick enough, he can keep his head above the water so he can keep breathing. And so he starts just kind of swimming towards where he could have landed, because Manny's not answering anything. And as he's swimming over there, he doesn't see him, he doesn't see a parachute, it's just like everything is gone. And at that point, he really starts to freak out, because all of his friends are gone, he has no clue where any of them are, and he just has to accept the fact that he's literally alone in the middle of the ocean. He has no supplies, no boat, in his shorts, just floating there. And so he starts looking around to see, like, all right, maybe I can see land in a direction and I'll start swimming that way, or maybe I'll see planes overhead and, like, go the opposite direction, because that means they just took off from there. But as he starts to take inventory of everything around him, he sees nothing. And the only thing that starts to play in his mind is that he's in shark-infested water, because that he is, and he's like, this is just the worst thing ever. And once he realizes he's in shark-infested water and that fear kicks in, he starts to even think about, like, okay, well, maybe it's better that I get eaten by sharks instead of just treading water until I slowly sip below the surface. Like, maybe that's the better option. And the fact that he even was taking inventory of options like that goes to show just how bad the situation was. Like, this is not a good place to be. And so he's kind of shaken, and he starts to just realize that there's a very, very low likelihood of any help coming either, because he's not in America. We have the Coast Guard out here. If a plane went down, they'd know, they'd come investigate pretty quickly. Still not great if you're just treading water, but you've got a chance. But this dude is just chilling in some random country, so the odds of a Coast Guard coming is slim to none, and it's basically on himself to try to figure out a way to survive this. Meanwhile, while he's stuck in the middle of the ocean, the people on the ground are standing there waiting for the guys to come land from their skydiving event. You know what I mean? So they're standing there, and sure enough, nobody's coming. Even if they landed elsewhere, they would have called her, they would have found a way to locate her. And so the person who owns this company is waiting at the landing zone for pickup. They never come, so she goes back to the airstrip to figure out what's going on, thinking maybe they just canceled it, the weather was too bad. And so she gets to the airstrip and is standing there for 20 minutes and realizes, oh crap, they're not here, they did not come back. So at that point, the panic alarm is sounded. They realize something must have happened to this flight, there must have been an accident, something good has not happened. But obviously that takes time, and by the time people start looking on the ocean for them, it's been 5 hours, and 5 hours later, it's dark. And Will is just struggling to tread water at that point. Imagine treading waters for 5 hours straight in the pitch black. He can't see anything around him, and that hopelessness starts to creep into him. But thankfully, as that hopelessness is starting to, like, take over him, he starts to see lights in the distance, and he gets, like, this burst of energy. And he starts to swim towards the light, and he's doing the backstroke because he's just finding it a little bit easier, and he's doing, like, 30 backstroke and then on flipping over and seeing where the light is, and he's flipping and starts to go towards the light, and he finally starts to get close to this light, right? And the tide kicks up and starts pulling him back out into the ocean. Like, he had finally started to make ground on it, and sure enough, all the ground he's making starts to go away. And once he had kind of had this burst of energy towards the light and then been pulled back out to sea, he kind of accepts the fact, like, I'm gonna die. You know, that effort to keep trying kind of leaves, and he just decides that, like, everything I've tried isn't working. I just have to accept it. And they had been searching a little bit during the day, but the Costa Rican emergency services, they say that they're not gonna search at night. It's too dangerous. And so for 9 hours, Will is just floating in the water. He's dehydrated because all this seawater's being pushed into his mouth. He starts to get attacked by jellyfish, just stinging him all over. Salt water's hitting the jellyfish wounds. This guy's just in the absolute worst place you could possibly be. And so once he starts to get stung by the jellyfish, he's like, I gotta get out of here. So he starts to swim away, but he ends up swimming into more jellyfish, like into the clump of them. He finally gets through them, and as soon as he gets through those jellyfish, he's like, oh my gosh, it just can't get worse. And he starts to see something coming at him, and he's like, great, there's a crocodile coming at me. So he starts to freak out, going into shock, thinking, just why is everything going against me? And after about 10 minutes, this thing that's approaching him comes towards him, and he's like, here it is, the crocodile's coming to get me. But it's a log, and as soon as he sees the log, a little bit of hope comes back, because he grabs onto it, and it kind of gives him a life raft, like something to float up on. And so now, 10 hours into treading water, he's got a log, which is going to make it a little bit easier to stay afloat. And at this point, the news has reached everybody. Everybody's panicking. Everybody's starting to search for him. They're trying to get everybody out there to go look for him. But it still takes another couple, 12, 14 hours before he would be rescued. And so 15 hours into this entire ordeal, he falls asleep on the log, somehow survives through the night, and so the daylight is up now, and he can see land relatively far away, but close enough where he thinks he can get to it. So he's just kind of riding the tide. He's too exhausted to really swim himself, so he's just kind of on this log, floating into the beach, and he just kind of slowly again gets pushed back out to sea. He rides it in for an hour, and then the tide turns and pulls him back out. And so for the second time during this 15-hour period, he gets so close to being rescued only to be dragged back out. And so a little bit after that, you know, a couple hours later, he's just floating on this log, and finally he's like, I've got to get rid of the log. I have to get rid of the log. It just keeps pulling me further and further out to sea because this current isn't me pushing inland anymore. My only hope for survival is to get rid of it. So he gets rid of the log, and at this point he's been treading water for nearly a whole day, so the exhaustion gets him pretty quick. He starts to go under the water, and he realizes that, you know, if help doesn't come in the next few minutes, there's a pretty good chance they're never gonna find him, and it just is what it is. And all of a sudden, as he's literally preparing himself to die, drifting off, preparing to go underwater, he thinks he hears a boat. And part of him is, as he's going under the water, is like, well, this is a hallucination. Like, what a cruel trick. The last thing my brain's gonna do to me is make me think that I hear a boat. Like, this is just ridiculous. But something prompts him to, like, look, and he looks and he sees a boat, and he starts waving to them, and he's like, all right, well, this is a hallucination. They won't see this. But all of a sudden, the boat starts coming towards him, right? And once the boat starts coming towards him, he lays back into the water and just kind of collapses. But sure enough, the next thing that he remembers seeing is 3 men on a fishing boat that are like looking over him, dragging him into the boat. And somehow, after 24 hours, literally just floating in the ocean, nothing good happening the entire time, jellyfish, crocodile scares, the entire thing, he gets rescued by this fishing boat in the middle of nowhere. Anyways, guys, that's gonna do it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, I would really appreciate you taking a second to press the like button. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought, and of course, subscribe if you're new and turn on those notifications. If you really want to help me out, link to the podcast Scuffedcast will be down below, or you could use code Scrubby at the G Fuel checkout. It's a great way to help me out and get a discount on G Fuel, so everyone's a winner. And other than that, be sure to check out the Halloween merch. I'll put a link at the top of the description. It's pretty fantastic if I get to say so myself, and you should check it out. And yeah, on that note, don't get anyone pregnant. If you do, make sure they're hot, and I'll see you guys next time. I'm out. Peace. Just turned 21, but my bank's a million. Swear I'm a little drunk, but it's a hell of a feeling. Got so damn high that I'm touching the ceiling. Yeah, next year, swear I'm doing the most. Me and my team. What's going on, guys? It's your boy Scrub here, back again with another video. Hope you guys are all having a great day. I know I am. About a couple days ago now, I made a video talking about this guy who was lost at sea for 133 days, and you guys enjoyed it, so I figured today I would put together another story time based on true events. This time, it's gonna be the time people stole $40 million in today's money off of trains and actually managed to get away with it for quite a while. And to this day, most of the money has not been found. So without further ado, sit back, relax, and enjoy the great train robbery of 1963. You would think that it's illegal. I'm getting quiet now. Lay low when you reach zone, piping down. Making out, stack the bread, cause you love the sound. Just someone. Alright, guys, so in reality, the great train robbery was 2.6 million pounds that was stolen off of a train, the Royal Mail train. When you adjust that for inflation and convert it to US dollars, it's $40 million, but regardless, it was stolen off of a train on its way from Glasgow to London in the early hours of the 8th of August of 1963. At the time, it was one of the biggest heists ever, and to this day, when adjusted for inflation and considering how much money they ended up recovering, it still is one of the biggest. But we're gonna get into how this all happened. So, it all started with a still unnamed security officer within the Royal Mail itself who detailed that there was a large amount of money being carried on these trains. And he gets introduced to these two criminals that were gonna do the raid and gives them the information. And these two criminals are similarly known as Gordon Goody and Buster Edwards, which I may say are very, fantastic heist named. Gordon Goody and Buster? Yeah, that sounds like they're ready to rob a train at a moment's notice. Anyways, this senior officer gets introduced to these two men by this clerk, and they spend the next couple months coming up with this raid. Obviously, they knew there was a bunch of money on the line, so they're like, look, we don't need to rush into this, no need to blow our load before we're ready. We just gotta be patient and make sure that this is very planned out. And they end up recruiting a bunch of people, and it's like the best of the criminal underworld, you know? Realistically, they went around and picked some of the most successful people that were available in the criminal underworld at the time, but the only problem is, none of the people that were currently in the group had any experience in stopping trains, you know, they had no idea how to get this train to stop or how to rob one. So they end up going out and finding 3 other people to join the group that were accomplished train robbers. Now, I don't really know what that means. Apparently, back in the day, this was a common profession, yes, you know how to call up Mark, he's fantastic at robbing trains, but that's how it worked, dude. And at this point, the group had swelled up to around 16 people, and that's quite a bit when you're talking about a group for a heist. Usually, they try to keep it smaller because they have to split profits less ways, but because of just the sheer scale of having to stop a Royal Mail train and steal all this money, it ended up ballooning to around 16 people. Regardless, on the morning of August 7th, 1963, the train set off from Glasgow towards London. It was supposed to arrive the next morning at 4 a.m., and it was even being followed by another train just to make sure that it would get there on time. The train itself had 12 carriages and 72 staff members on board the carriages that were on the way down to London, and the goal of the staff wasn't security or anything. Their job was to just sort the mail on the train as it went to London, so it wasn't like the 16 guys had any massive armed force that they had to take once they got on the train. So there's a bunch of mail in Glasgow. They're getting more and more mail on each additional stop, and obviously, because this is before you could send money electronically, there's a lot of money in the mail. One of the carriages that was right behind the engine was known as what was called a high value package coach, you know, a little bit more security because that's where they kept the stuff that really needed to get to London safely. It carried large quantities of money, official documents that needed to be sorted, basically anything that couldn't be lost. The value of a shipment at the time was usually about $300,000 in this HVP system, the high value package system. But by luck, absolute luck, the previous weekend there was a holiday, so all these banks were sending in more money than usual because of the holiday. And what is usually 300,000 pounds
pounds of money is now 2.5 and 3 million. They didn't really have enough time to count all of it because they were picking it up as they went along, but it's estimated somewhere in the ballpark of 2.5 and 3 million pounds were on the train. The robbers, it's unknown, obviously, if they were like, yo, it's a holiday weekend, so there's gonna be more money, but obviously the train is more stacked than they ever expected. And what even luckier for these guys, you might be thinking, wow, that's really lucky for these criminals, but even more lucky for them. In August of 1963, there were these carriages, these HVP carriages, and they had gotten all these new security upgrades, you know, new alarms, bars over the windows, catches on the doors. But at the time of the robbery, these new ones that were super secure were out of service. So it just so happened that it's a holiday weekend with a crap ton more money on the train, and on top of that, the carts being used to transfer all the high value packages are the ones without any security. It is seriously mind-blowing how lucky these robbers got. They probably still would have gotten away with it anyways, but it was the perfect storm for them to get away with it. So at about 3 a.m. on the 8th of August, the driver of the train stops at a red light signal at the Sears crossing. He doesn't really know what the red light signal is there for. All he knows is that he has to stop, and it's the official railroad signal, so he has no reason to think it's not legit. The only problem is the signal wasn't legit. The robbers had tampered with it and covered the green light and then put a battery on the red light to make him stop. So obviously, because it was unexpected, the second in command of the train got off the train and went to call somebody with the telephone that was near the signal. And when he gets to the telephone, he's like, oh my God, all the cables on the phone are cut. We can't talk to anybody. So he's going back to the train to let him know that there's something fishy going on, and that's when the robbers just jump him. Meanwhile, while that guy's getting jumped outside, all of the other 16 people are flooding into the engine cabins from both sides, and they're just overpowering everybody. They decided that they were just gonna flood the cabin with massive amounts of people instead of having like a 1v1 situation. And Mills, one of the guys in the engine room, was the only person who was hurt during the robbery miraculously, and he got hit in the head and was rendered like semi-unconscious. They basically gave him a huge concussion. So by that point, they're like, all right, we've got the people subdued. Now we need to get the train to the location where we're gonna offload the money. They couldn't offload the money here for some reason. They had set up this marking like a half a mile away where they were gonna unload the money on this bridge. So they needed to get the train there. Now, they had hired this particular guy who had a bunch of experience driving trains. I guess he had worked driving trains for a while to be able to move the train and all the expensive carts and everything they needed to their new location. They obviously didn't want to take like the entire train. They just wanted the stuff that they needed. So they had hired this guy to like specifically drive the train. And he was an older guy who had a bunch of experience. Well, I guess he had never driven these types of trains before, because he gets into the area to like drive the train to the location, and he's like, oh, I don't know how to drive this train whatsoever. So at that point, the robbers are standing around and they're like, well, we've already overtaken the train, so we need to get the money out of here. So they end up going back to the conductor that they had previously overpowered, that they're holding hostage, and they force him to drive the train to the location. So they get the train to the location by forcing the conductor to basically help them move it. They have weapons. He didn't. He really didn't have too much of a choice. And they get to the new location. They take the conductor that had just previously helped him, and with him being kind of dragged behind him, they go to the high value package carriage that still hadn't been broken into yet. And they look inside and they see 4 people. The 4 people inside of this carriage are not security guards. They're civilians. They don't really know what's going on. They have no security experience. And so when 16 men like break in, they don't really stand a chance whatsoever, dude. They get overpowered almost instantly. Once they're overpowered, they make everybody lay in the corner. They handcuff the conductor that had just helped them move the train here, and they just kind of lock them in this high value package carriage while they're emptying it. So the robbers remove 120 sacks of stuff out of this high-value package carriage, and it takes them 20 minutes to do it. They formed a human chain with all 16 of them and just went to town emptying it as fast as possible. And they end up leaving the scene 30 minutes after the robbery had began. And in an effort to mislead these witnesses, right, they used 2 different Land Rover vehicles, but both of them had the same license plate. So that way when people were like, this car in this car, there were 2 cars with the same license plate, so they would be seen in 2 different places, and it would just cause confusion. And honestly, you gotta give him credit, dude. That's a pretty efficient robbery standard. To go from stopping the train to removing 128 bags of loot, getting in the car, and leaving within 30 minutes is fast. That's basically like a NASCAR pit crew at just robbing people, which I would never recommend. So at that point, they start heading along all these minor roads, and they had a radio in the car listening to the police scanner. And for like 45 minutes, they're going back to this farm. And around the same time that they get to the farm is around the same time that the first reports of the crime start coming in. From listening to the radio, they can hear that the police had calculated that they had gotten to like 30 miles in a radius, and they were kind of shutting down the crime scene. This declaration, though, was given by one of the witnesses, who apparently said that the robbers had told them not to move for 30 minutes. So the cops are like, all right, they told everybody not to move for 30 minutes. That's also how far they could have gotten away. So chances are they're hiding within this certain radius. But whatever, they go back to their hiding place, and they end up splitting up all of the money they had stolen. And each person gets about 150,000 pounds, which is worth about 3 million in today money, which is not too bad of a haul for 30 minutes of work, dude. $3 million, obviously. They had to do all this. However, at this point, the police started using a new tactic, and they started to realize that they were closing in a lot faster than they thought, and what they thought would be a super safe location on the farm was pretty quickly getting zeroed in on by the police. And, they definitely did not want to get caught. So, obviously, they had driven these vehicles to the farm, and people along the way had seen them. So they leave the cars at the farm, and they kind of group up and drive the gang to one of the other people's houses to kind of relax and clean up a little bit. And as soon as they get out of there, one of the people that had been specifically hired as a cleanup crew gets to work, and he starts wiping everything down from fingerprints, and he was supposed to have burned it all down, and that was his job. So all of the rest of the robbers leave, assuming that this guy's gonna get to work cleaning everything. And this guy really screws everybody over, because he does wipe some fingerprints from some stuff, but he was basically supposed to torch the entire farm and burn it to the ground, and he just didn't do it. So, obviously, that puts a big screw up into things, and so the rest of the gang is like, okay, well, we have to go back to the farm and just see what's going on. And as they're going back to the farm, they find out that the police had now found the farm. So, the guy who was supposed to be in charge of cleaning up the entire operation literally screwed everybody and just left all of the evidence for the police to find at the hideout. And once the police find the hideout, it's not very difficult. Obviously, considering the guy didn't end up burning down the farm, he also missed some fingerprints and palm prints, and they end up finding 11 of the people that were involved in the robbery. Of everybody who was captured, most of them ended up getting 30 years in prison. The most common thing that they were convicted of was 25 years for conspiracy to commit robbery and 30 years for armed robbery. And honestly, all things considered, it's very likely that they would have gotten away with it if it wasn't for the fact that the police literally ended up finding their hideout intact with most of the information there. A lot of them were able to go on the run pretty effectively, though. You gotta remember, this is the 60s, so a lot of the closed circuit television and all the stuff they use to track down people nowadays wasn't necessarily there to help track them down. Real talk, though, I definitely think it's interesting at the very least that they were able to get away with it for so long. A lot of them ended up getting out of the country, and it took them forever to be tracked down. And as for the money itself, because a lot of them were able to go on the run for a little bit, they ended up blowing through the money pretty quickly. I'm sure when you're living on the run, you blow through money because you know you're probably not going to get to spend it much longer. So most of it was just never recovered. Nothing they could really do about it. Regardless, guys, I think that's going to do it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, please be sure to press the like button. Let me know in the comments section down below what you thought of the video. Subscribe if you're new and turn on those notifications. If you want more content, I do have a podcast called The Scuffed Cast. You can find it at the link down below, along with the link to the intro song in the description if you want to give it a listen. And if you're in the mood for merch, the Teespring store down there also does have many options. But on that note, guys, that's going to do it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, don't get anyone pregnant. If you are going to do it, though, make sure they're hot, and hopefully I will see you guys all tomorrow with another video. I'm out. Peace. I'm gonna go rob a train.
Roy Cleveland Sullivan. He was a park ranger that ended up being struck by lightning 7 times in his lifetime. So you're probably wondering, okay, getting struck by lightning 7 times is extremely unlucky, but like, what was this dude's story? How did this even happen? What's going on, guys? It's your boy Scrub here, back again with another video. Hope you guys are having a great day. I know I am, and today we're going to be talking about somebody that didn't have a whole lot of great days, which is arguably the unluckiest man in history. Well, Roy Cleveland Sullivan was a guy who was born on February 7th, 1912 in Greene County, Virginia. He was one of 12 kids, so quite a big family. In his childhood, he was a pretty outdoorsy guy. He liked to be outside, and naturally, when it came time to get a job, he started looking for something that would let him be outdoors a lot. And in 1936, he started a job at Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. And as part of that job, he basically had to patrol and monitor the entire park. You know, he was outside a lot, and it was a really, really big park. So it would often be times where he would be walking from one thing to another while patrolling, and there was a thunderstorm, and there just wouldn't really be a lot of places to hide because, you know, he's in the middle of patrolling the national park. And what really sucks about this is, like, his luck was so bad that people started to avoid being around him later in his life. You know, he had been struck so many times and so many bad things happened to him that people really just assumed that there had to be a curse on this dude at this point, right? Like, there's no way someone's that unlucky. And he recalls a specific instance when he was walking with the chief ranger, like his boss, you know, on a thunderstormy type of day. And as soon as lightning struck, the chief ranger looked at him and was like, "All right, I'll see you later. I don't want to talk here anymore. You know, I'm out of here." But that's a little bit of backstory on Roy Cleveland Sullivan here. Now we're going to get into the times he was extremely unlucky, which is the 7 times he was struck by lightning. Yeah, that's right. So the first one, 6 years after starting his job as a park ranger in April of 1942. There was a thunderstorm going on while he was patrolling the park, and he was kind of looking for a place to hide from the rain and lightning. And he ended up going underneath this fire lookout tower. In national parks, they have these huge towers, you know, that are kind of built to let people get a better view of everything and watch for smoke from any forest fires. But this particular tower that he decided to hide under in this instance was newly built, so it didn't have a lightning rod on it yet. And basically, this tower, because it didn't have a lightning rod, ended up getting struck by lightning 7 or 8 times, to the point where it catches on fire. There's fire jumping all over the place, and Sullivan was inside of it to take shelter, right? So he scrambles out of this thing that's on fire now, that's been struck a bunch, and as he's running out of this fire tower lookout thing, he gets a few feet out of it and all of a sudden gets struck by lightning. And this was the worst of all 7 of his strikes, but it ended up burning like a half-inch strip all the way down his right leg, his toe, and then burned a hole in his shoe. But like, imagine the fear of, oh crap, it's a thunderstorm, I'm gonna hide in here, only for where you're hiding to get struck by lightning 8 times, and then when you go to run away, you get struck too. Awful luck. But it gets worse. For a while, everything's all chill, but in July of 1969, he got hit by lightning while in his truck, which is supposed to be very, very unusual. He was driving on a mountain road, obviously in the national park, doing his job, and usually when you're driving a car that gets struck by lightning, the metal body of the vehicle kind of like sheds some of the electricity from it. It's called a Faraday cage, it's what it acts like. And so usually that's the best place to get hit by lightning, you know, is like, all right, I'm driving a car, if it strikes, at least the car is going to take a majority of the charges. Well, in this instance, the lightning hit a tree nearby and his window was open. The lightning reflected off the tree, what are the odds of that happening, and knocked him unconscious while he was driving his truck on a mountain road. Obviously, because it had already reflected, this one like wasn't as powerful as the first one, but it ended up burning off his eyebrows and eyelashes, set some of his hair on fire, and then he was driving. So, you know, thankfully there wasn't an accident, but the truck just ended up slowly rolling to a stop at a cliff. Like, oh, okay, so if it would have been any sooner or later that he would have been knocked unconscious, he would have driven off a cliff. And at this point, you're like, all right, this dude's luck can't get worse. But we have 5 more lightning strikes. There's a third time this dude gets struck by lightning, right? This time it's just in his front yard, no crazy story. It hits a nearby power transformer and jumped from the power transformer to his left shoulder, shocked him pretty bad, but all in all, you know, not as bad as the other 2. But still, getting struck by lightning 3 times, the odds of that happening should be slim to none. There's very few worlds where you should be like, I gotta be careful about about getting struck 3 times. But as I said, that's still not enough. That one there's not a lot of details on because it just happened in his front yard. But this next one in 1972, so only 2 years later, he was working in a ranger station in the Shenandoah National Park, when he was struck again. This time, once again, his hair gets set on fire and he tries to smother the flames with his jackets. It's not really working, so he runs to the bathroom and he tries to put his head under the water tap to put out the fire, but it doesn't fit, so he uses a wet towel. And at this point he is getting used to this, but it's not like it's a pleasant experience anytime you get shocked with thousands of volts of electricity and your hair bursts into flames and you have to be running around the place because nothing's able to put it out. Honestly, this is awful. And at that point, up to this point, he thought it was just bad luck. But after the 4th strike, the 4th time he gets struck, this is when he starts to believe that there's some force out there that's just trying to destroy him. He starts to be fearful of death. He starts to think everything's out to get him. And for months after the 4th strike, whenever he is caught in a storm with his truck, he pulls over, lies down, and just waits until it passes. He started to believe that he honestly attracted lightning. So if he stood in a crowd of people, he carried a case of water on him in case his hair was set on fire. He started to think there must have been something in his blood that was attracting all of these lightning strikes to him, which, I mean, definitely not fun to feel like you're the reason all these problems are happening to you. But of course, it does get worse, dude. On August 7th, 1973, he's out on patrol again, and he sees a storm cloud coming, and he drives away. And as he's driving away, this cloud starts to pick up speed, and he says that it seemed like it was following him. So he's trying to outrun the cloud, and it's kind of coming behind him, but finally he decides that he's been running long enough and he can get out of his truck. And so he gets out of his truck, and as soon as he gets out of his truck, he gets struck by a lightning bolt. And this was the one time that he says he actually saw the bolt that hit him. He says he was walking across this opening, and the lightning hit him. It moved down his left arm, his left leg, and knocked off his shoe. And then it crossed over to his right leg, and he was still conscious at this point, right? So at this point, his body is just so used to being struck by lightning, it's not even passing out. And so as he's struck, he crawls over to his truck because his legs just got shocked, and he has to pour a can of water, which he always has on him, on his head now because it had burst into flames again. At this point, the dude should have considered going bald, honestly, no disrespect, but if every time you get struck by lightning, the hair lights on fire, it's probably time to just say goodbye to it. But it's still not done. The next strike, June 5th, 1976, he gets struck, this time in his ankle. He saw a cloud, thought it was following him, and tried to run away, but he was struck anyways, and once again his hair catches on fire. So this dude's just on the ultimate bad luck streak. That's strike number 6. But the 7th one, the last one, the very last one, was in 1977. Lightning ended up hitting him again while he was fishing in a pond. The lightning hit the top of his head, setting his hair on fire, and burned his chest and stomach. And so then, obviously in a crap ton of pain because he got shocked, he turned around to go back to his car after putting his hair out of fire. And this is when you're like, oh my god, something has to have cursed this dude. As he's on his way back to the truck after being struck with lightning for the 7th time, there's a bear there, which is after the fish he's catching. So he ends up having to hit the bear with a stick and run to the car. And he said it was the 22nd time in his life he'd had to hit a bear with a stick. And listen, I know that obviously people that work in a national park are going to have more interaction with animals, but it's not every day someone gets struck by lightning 7 times in their lifetime, and then on top of that, also have had to fight off a bear 22 times. That's just nature's way of saying it doesn't like you. So obviously that's all the 7 times, and sadly Roy passed away at 71. As for the reasoning behind it, scientists have looked into it. They've wondered if there was any particular reason this guy was so conductive to electricity, and people really have no idea why he had such bad luck, and even the people around him had no clue why it was either. And obviously when all this was going on, a lot of people thought it was a hoax, but the Guinness Book of World Records themselves went out there and investigated everything and confirmed it to be true. So all in all, it's just a pretty weird situation where this guy was just a human lightning rod, and everything he did led to him being struck. Pretty crazy. Alright, so that guy I think kind of takes the cake as the unluckiest man in the world, but I decided to do a couple more stories about other people from history that were just insanely unlucky, and the second one we're going to be talking about is Frane Selak. I'm probably just going to refer to him as Selak for the rest of the video. And surprisingly, this dude is still alive. He was born on June 14th, 1929, and he's known for being the luckiest and unluckiest man in the world. Basically, he's had 7 near-death experiences, which a normal person should not have been able to survive, you know, which calls into question if you're the luckiest person for surviving 7 times or the unluckiest for 7 of those things happening to you. But either way, it's a pretty crazy story, dude. And, you know, let me know in the comments section if you think this is lucky or unlucky of him. So it all started in January of 1962. The Croatian music teacher, Mr. Selak, was traveling from Sarajevo to Dubrovnik by train. You know, just sitting on the train doing his thing. But he did not realize that when he was sitting on the train that he was about to, like, take this 40-year journey that was going to be marked with all these freak accidents and him almost dying at every turn. So he's on this train in 1962, right? And without really any explanation, the train ends up going off the tracks and plunges into this river. And obviously, it's near Sarajevo, so it's a pretty cold river. And the train hits the ice water, it gets stuck there for a little bit, and 17 passengers on this train die. But Mr. Selak, the music teacher, manages to swim back to shore, manages to survive the hypothermia that's also there from being in the cold water, lives through the shock, lives through the broken arms and all the bruises and everything, and he makes it out of there. As I said, 17 other people died, but like, that's the start of the bad luck, just a train derailing and plunging into a river. Obviously, their luck is bad enough there, but 1 year later in 1963, he decides to do air travel, probably done with the whole train game. He was on a plane traveling from Zagreb to Rijeka, I hope I said those right, when on this plane, dude, a door ends up flying off the plane, right? And everyone has seen it in the movies when like a door comes off the plane and the vacuum opens up and stuff starts to get sucked out. That actually starts happening, but instead of just stuff getting sucked out, he manages to get sucked out of the aircraft. Yeah, that's right, dude. He literally gets pulled out of an airplane that had a malfunction. And a couple minutes after he's yanked out of the airplane through this open door, the plane goes down because obviously it can't fly very well with the door open. And everybody else on the plane was killed in the crash. But somehow this dude wakes up in the hospital. He had been found in a haystack like a little bit away. He had been pulled out of the plane, manages to land in a pile of soft hay. Everyone else on the plane crashes, but he's fine. He really doesn't have too much memory of it. In fact, he just woke up in the haystack. And at this point, you're like, all right, dude, maybe traveling isn't for you. You know, let's be realistic here. It might not be a good situation for you to be going anywhere. If the train has derailed, your planes are losing doors. But it gets worse. In 1966, so only a little bit after all of this, he decides, I'll try buses, right? There's no way that another bad thing could happen on a bus. The odds of that are slim to none. Well, sure enough, he's on this bus. Something crazy happens. There's an accident, and somehow the bus goes off a road and ends up in a river. So once again, he's in a situation where what he's traveling on has gone off the predetermined course and has now crashed into some frigid water. And this time on this bus crash, 4 people were killed. Still tragic, but you know, not 17 like the train. But as for this dude, he doesn't even really get any severe injuries. This bus has literally plummeted off the road into a river, and the worst injury he sustains is some cuts and bruises. So this is where the dynamic comes in. Is he lucky? Is he unlucky? Yeah, on one hand, he's surviving all these things with minor injuries, but on the other hand, like, why does all this stuff seem to happen everywhere this dude decides to travel? But the bus into the river is not the last one. 4 years later, in 1970, he's driving along in his car by himself. He's just decided to give up public transport. It's way too dangerous and not worth it. Well, somehow his car ends up suddenly catching fire, right? Literally bursts into flames. He pulls over, gets out of the car, starts to run away from the car, obviously, because a flaming car only means one thing if you've played video games, and the fuel tank explodes and engulfs the entire car in flames as soon as he gets out and starts running away. So once again, another incident where he's trying to get from point A to point B, and literally something explodes or has some catastrophic failure. And at this point, he's literally just knocking off the versions of transportation like it's no tomorrow. He's been in a train crash, a plane crash, a bus crash, his car's blowing up. Like, honestly, if this dude decided to ride a Razor scooter, I wouldn't be surprised if it was the first Razor scooter to spontaneously combust, even though it doesn't have a gas tank. But 3 years later, even after that, he gets a different car, you know, things go back to normal.
Well, a faulty fuel pump ends up spraying gas all over the engine of another one of his cars, and it ends up shooting flames through the air vents. Yeah, that's right, dude. The first car fire, bad luck. The second one, extra bad luck, because this time, instead of just there being a fire, the malfunction causes the air conditioning to become a flamethrower. And you would think there's no way he gets out of that one without any crazy injuries, right? But somehow, even though his air vents start becoming a flamethrower, he gets out of the car, and the only injury he has is that his arm hair has been singed off. And at that point, all of his friends are calling him lucky. And I don't know why, like, only now they decided to go with that. You know, in my opinion, he was pretty lucky by the time he survived the other 9 crashes, but whatever. I also don't necessarily know if lucky would, like, describe it. Once again, dude, if my car just suddenly decided to become a flamethrower on me, I wouldn't consider myself lucky. I would be like, oh my god, my car just tried to kill me. And after that, he went on a good luck streak for quite a while. From 1973 to 1995, there was not that many incidences, right? But in 1995, he got hit by a city bus and only got minor injuries, so the bad luck comes back a bit. And then a year later, also in the 90s, in 96, he's doing his thing on a mountain road, once again in another car, and this time he comes around the corner, and instead of it bursting into flames, he sees a truck coming at him in his lane. And so he realizes he has 2 options, right? He can either hit the truck or, like, drive off the mountain. So he drives through the guardrail, jumps out of the car, lands in a tree, but the car keeps going and explodes 300 feet underneath him. So he literally has like a Spider-Man moment where he jumps out of a car plummeting down into a ravine and lands in a tree. That is some real Fast and Furious stuff we got going on here. Absolutely nutty. And then beyond that, to add a little bit to the luck, right? 2 days later, on his 73rd birthday, or 2 days after his 73rd birthday, I should say, he ends up winning the lottery. He wins $1.1 million. You know, he's just an ecstatic guy about it. At the time of being 73, he's on his 5th wife, but after almost dying 9 times, who can blame him? And he ended up buying 2 houses and a boat with his money and just decided to, like, live his life, bro. And in 2010, he just gave away the rest of his money to his relatives and decided to live frugally after that. But honestly, man, after you've lived through death 7 times, it's not like anything can really excite you the same way again. Regardless, that dude definitely has got the badge of luckiest and luckiest at the exact same time, and I'm not really sure what you guys think. I don't know what I would classify him as. Winning the lottery, pretty lucky, but at the same time, is that just life being like, sorry for almost killing you so many times, here's some money? I don't know. Let me know in the comments section. And I've got one more story for you guys that I think you're going to enjoy. We've talked about some unlucky people. I figured we'd wrap it up with the luckiest woman to ever exist. She's also incredibly smart, so, you know, we'll talk about it. Her name is Joan Ginther. She was born in 1947. She's still alive. She's still kicking around, and she's a former math professor at Stanford. She's got a PhD in statistics, so she knows her stats. And when somebody knows their stats, there's certain games that they're able to play a little bit better than the average bear. And she ended up figuring out the algorithm, which was like behind how they figure out where the winning lottery tickets go, right? And so she figures out with her PhD in statistics kind of where the winning tickets are likely to be, where they might be located, and then goes out and buys tickets from these locations. In doing this, she ends up winning $20 million. Now, there's a lot of arguments over whether or not she actually figured out an algorithm or just like used her birthday, but regardless, she's managed to win the lottery a plethora of times, so it seems kind of bizarre unless she has some weird system for picking it out or is literally just the luckiest person on the planet. And what's even weirder is this person just refuses to give interviews. They don't want to talk to people. They don't want to talk about their strategy. It's like Joan just kind of wants to be left alone, which, to be fair, if I also just won $20 million, I wouldn't want to be talking to people either. The only thing that kind of raises some red flags about this is that the store that has given her 2 of the 3 winning tickets she's received came from the same store. She buys these lottery tickets from this thing at the Times Market store, and she's won the lottery 4 times, as I've said, and 3 of the tickets came from things she purchased in her hometown, and 2 of them came from this particular market. Whether or not that just means that the algorithm like has it down in this particular city, who knows? But either way, winning the lottery 4 times is absolutely insane. And as for when she won the lottery, it is relatively spread out. Like, the first time she ever won the lottery was first in 1993. 1993, you're doing your thing. You win $5.4 million in the Texas Lotto. That's not a bad payday. If you adjust that to today, that's the equivalent of winning like $10 million. I don't know about y'all, but I'd take a nice $10 million check tomorrow if somebody offered it. After that, though, it doesn't stop there. 1993, she wins $10 million. 2006 happens. She wins $2 million off a scratch-off ticket, which, you know, the odds of doing that pretty slim, but hey, good for you. 2 years later, she's like, hey, let's get back to back on him, win $3 million from another ticket. So at this point, she's up to what, like, 15 million-ish? But 2 years after that, in 2010, she ended up winning $10 million, which was her largest prize yet. So in the span of, what was that, 4 years, from 2006 to 2010, she ended up winning the lottery 3 times, which is absolutely insane luck. And as for how she ended up taking the money, the first time that she got the prize, that $5.4 million in 1993, she ended up taking her prize annually over 19 years, which is basically like, you know, let me do some math here, but $5.4 million divided by 19 years here means that she was just getting a cool $284,000 a year from the state of Texas. Not too shabby if you ask me, especially if you just keep winning the lottery on top of it, right? But as for everything after that, she only did that one time. She took out everything else in, like, you know, just lump sum payments. The only problem with lump sum payments is they take that away quite a bit. So, like, for example, you win $10 million, you take the lump sum, you get $7.5 million after taxes, which is insane, the fact that this lady has won the lottery 4 times. And just to give you an idea of how rare this is, like, the odds of this actually happening being absolutely slim to none, the odds of winning this time, or this many times, is 1 in 18 septillion. Like, 1 in 18 septillion. We're not talking 1 in a million. We're not talking 1 in a billion here. I don't even know what septillion is, except for the fact that it's an insanely large number. As for, like, what she's currently up to with all that lottery money, she actually lives in Las Vegas, but likes to keep a low profile, you know. I think anyone who just moves around with a lot of money like that tends to try to keep a low profile, doesn't want people to know a crap ton about them. I will say, if she's such a fan of winning the lottery, though, Vegas does make sense for gambling. We do not have a state lottery. Not a lot of people know that, but, you know, if you're into other types of gambling, it's probably a good place to be. But yeah, that's the story of the lady who managed to win the lottery 4 times. Absolutely insane. Definitely up there as the luckiest. But on that note, guys, that's gonna do it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, I'd appreciate you taking a second to press the like button. Let me know in the comment section down below what you thought of the video. If you like this series, if you like this style, let me know. And of course, subscribe if you're new and turn on those notifications. If you want to help me out more, then you can of course check out my podcast, link down below to the Scuffed Cast, or use code SCRUBBY at the G Fuel checkout. And now that it's October, of course, we've got the Halloween merch. Be sure to pick that up if you haven't already. Link will be at the top of the description. And on that note, don't get anyone pregnant. If you do, make sure they're hot, and I'm out. Peace.
Nice rack and her ass Brazilian. Just turned 21, but my bank's a million. Swear I'm a little drunk, but it's a hell of a feeling. Got so damn high that I'm touching the ceiling, yeah. Next year, swear I'm doing the most. Me and my team ain't good.
What's going on, guys? It's your boy Scrub here, back again with another video, and today I've got some more scary stories. There will be a spookier gameplay next time, but for now, enjoy the Halloween Balloons Tower Defense map. I've been a technical diver for the better part of a decade. Something about the ocean and all its unexplored wonder has always drawn me to the deep. The entire uncharted, alien world lurks just beneath us, waiting to reveal its mysteries to those daring enough to take the plunge. I guess you could say that diving is my passion. It has been my entire adult life, and now I can't even bring myself to go to the deep end of a pool without having a panic attack. It all started when one of my buddies approached me with the idea of going on a little excursion. Todd had a fairly formidable boat that he carved out of a living by engaging in, let's just say, less than legal activities. Anyways, some reputable characters that Todd helped move cargo into the country had told him about a cave several miles off the coast of his own country. Truth be told, no matter how much time I spend on the background of how we found ourselves 100 feet below sea level, I'll still never understand why or how I agreed to such a misguided idea, and it hardly matters now. At 99 feet below sea level, the pressure on your body normally felt by the atmosphere is quadrupled. The sunlight feebly attempts in vain to penetrate the darkness. Darkness rules there, and creatures of the dark are all that inhabit it. I checked my depth and air pressure gauges and looked up to see Todd hand signaling me to follow him to the mouth of the cave. I flutter-kicked silently forward, floating just above the seaweed and silt-covered ocean floor, taking in as much of the world as my low-profile, narrow-lens mask would let me. When we reached the mouth of the cave, Todd dropped to the floor and clipped his line to a formation near the entrance. This was a very important step in cave diving. That line was our only way back out of the system. I held my light on his hands while he worked, but my gaze drifted back to the mouth of the cave. The darkness was just as oppressive as always, but there was something strange. I couldn't put my finger on it at the time. The ominous black maw was somehow more intense than it should be. Then I heard it, a low-pitched roar from out of the deep. A thunderous echo sounded from so far below it was a whisper by the time it reached us. That's the strange thing about hearing when you dive that far down. You don't just hear, you feel. You feel it in your chest, in your bones. The noise echoed through me and I felt my stomach drop. We hadn't come this far for nothing, though. We dutifully pressed on. Todd held the line and made the entrance first, and I followed behind. My hand trailed along the line as it unfurled. With graceful strokes, we kicked about 30 or 40 feet into the system before my light caught a silver glint out of the backdrop of darkness of neutral-toned rock formations. Todd signaled that he saw it as well, and we stopped. Kicking myself over to it, the narrow beam cast itself on the object. The eerie silence was broken only by the soft, rhythmic beat of our exhales as they bubbled to the roof of the tunnel. The glint revealed itself to be a scuba tank half buried in the silt. Many divers bring along a spare for a safety rig. Last thing you want when you're 100 feet down and closed by a rock ceiling is to run out of air, but who would leave it behind? We clipped it off to our line with the intention of taking it back with us when we made the return trip. Delving deeper into the system, we came across our first fork. Todd signaled me. He was asking which way I thought we should go. My light panned back and forth between the two tunnels. It was smothered by the abysmal nothingness no more than 10 feet ahead. The ever-present pressure continued to squeeze like a python coiling around its prey. It was oppressive. I felt a slight current brush the cold, dark water across my skin. It came from the left tunnel, and I gestured to the left, and we continued our exploration. We were 110 feet deep here. Even as an experienced diver, the pressure became taxing. Several kick paces in, something caught the focus beam of my light. It was unnatural. It stuck out like a sore thumb among the rocky stalagmites within my narrow beam of vision. I gracefully kicked over to it, careful not to stir the silt at the bottom of the cave floor. Once stirred, silt takes a considerable amount of time before settling again. More time than air tanks afforded us, sadly. If I thought my vision was limited before, a silt storm would mean complete and total blindness. Reaching my point of fixation, I settled and focused upon the thing that had caught my eye. Pulling it from its sunken place, I found it to be a diver's slate. Divers can't communicate verbally underwater, so what can normally be signaled and recognized through hand motions, divers instead will write on slate and pass to one another. Shining my narrow beam onto its surface, I made out hastily written words. Size refrigerator, smooth black skin, dolphin-like, some humanoid features, opposable thumbs, ? Chilled, I passed the slate to Todd, who read it, and after glancing worriedly at me, tucked it in his gear pouch. We pressed forward, and as we neared the end of the tunnel, the walls began narrowing until they pressed against my shoulders. At one point, it became so narrow I had to remove my tank and pass it through the opening before slithering through myself. For a brief moment, I became stuck. The familiar panic set in, and I took several slow breaths to calm myself, then exhaled every bit of air in my lungs and managed to become just slender enough to push myself through the other side. On the other side of this obstacle, the system opened up and we found ourselves in a ledge that dropped off into a large chamber. Shining my light around the perimeter, I noted horizontal boundaries. Turning my narrow beam down towards what should have been the floor of the chamber, my light was snuffed out by the overwhelming blackness. To this day, I have no idea how impossibly deep it could have stretched. I settled down to the bottom of the ledge and peered over the edge. The moment my knees touched the sand, I realized my right knee was landing on something hard. I reached into the sand and grabbed it and pulled it from its burial place. It was a video camera. Clearly a high-end one, too. Whoever made it this far must have wanted to document their expedition. Fumbling with the buttons, I switched it on and positioned my light on the playback scene so I could see the last recorded video. The video started and I recognized the side of the obstacle we had just pressed our way through. The frame reached the end of the ledge we now found ourselves on and then began pounding around the room. It's eerie to watch a video underwater with sound. It had all the effect of a silent horror film. The deja vu sense, I had seen the surroundings that I was currently in, didn't put me at ease. Then the frame panned down to the bottom of the cavern, and back up from the abyss to the rest on the figure of a diver positioned next to the cameraman. Clearly it was the dive buddy of whoever was shooting. The diver in the frame looked towards the camera, when suddenly a dark figure shot across the frame and out of view. The first diver appeared just as he was moments before. Then he clutched his throat. He clasped both of his hands to his neck as if he was choking. Then wisps of dark red blood stretched out from his grip, like malevolent fingers spreading their reach across the dark water. The figure rocketed into frame again from a new direction and out of sight. The diver's mask and regulator was gone now, and so was a large, haphazardly torn portion of his face. The camera frame shook in obvious shock as blood swirled violently, dyeing the water in view. The still twitching body floated limply forward until the figure rocketed again, and it was gone, dragged down into the black. The frame peered over the ledge until it was smacked violently and the screen turned black. Out of the silent nothingness, a roar exploded into being. Startled, I dropped the camera. To my left, Todd, in a clear panicked motion, said to go back the way we came. Kicking with all my might, I made it back to the narrow passageway and began the arduous task of shoving myself through. Barely getting through the obstacle once again, I turned to help Todd. He passed through his tank and I grabbed. He fit his head, then his shoulders through in a panicked hurry. His body filled up the entirety of the passageway and I could only see his head pointing out of the rocks. But before he could gain any more ground, his head jerked in a sickening way. Bubbles exploded from his regulator as he screamed in pain, and blood seeped through the opening and began staining the water red around us. Helplessly, I tried to tug him through, but as I pulled, something began pulling back the other way. Todd's regulator flooded the chamber with purged air bubbles as a scream of pain propelled them violently towards the roof of the tunnel. The regulator dropped from his mouth and his head dropped lifelessly down. Horrified, I realized whatever that godforsaken was that was on the other side, the lifeless corpse of my friend, was the only thing barring it from pursuing me. The aquatic roar sounded loudly as more blood poured into the side of the obstacle. I realized this is my chance. It's with shame I admit that I left my friend there so I could have more time to escape. My heart pounded as I swam with all my might to the mouth of the cave system, and foolishly I made an emergency ascent to the surface, not stopping to decompress. It was worth the risk of the bends, just get the hell out of the water. It's been more than a month since then. I finally recovered from the bends after spending whatever in a hyperbaric chamber. I can no longer bear the thought of swimming, let alone diving, and I can't even explain why. All the proof I had of that wretched thing is buried in the cave with the body of my friend. I couldn't keep this post to myself. I can barely cling to my sanity as it is. I had to tell someone, somehow, so I will post it here. Hopefully this will be a warning to all those seeking the mysteries of the deep. The Google algorithm has been acting up lately. It has been giving me some very strange recommendations. Usually it's right on the money and sometimes predicts things that I want before I even have mentioned them out loud, and I wonder how it works. Is it reading my mind, or does it just know me better than I know myself? For instance, recently I was thinking about replacing my laptop. The old one was starting to malfunction and was slowing down to the point of being irritating. Sure enough, ads for laptops started appearing at the side window of my browser when I visited various websites, even though I hadn't mentioned the problem to anyone and hadn't even said it out loud that the old laptop was bothering me. Again and again, ads began to show up that catered to my very needs, getting more and more creepily specific. A hole ripped in my underwear and an ad for underwear popped up in my Google phone. I broke a coffee mug and ads for coffee mugs started to show up. I didn't even have to think about stuff for a while. It popped up on my feed before I even knew that I wanted it. I tried not to give in to these temptations, but I couldn't help myself. The ads were too perfect. It was everything I needed at the click of the button. It didn't matter that I had a shopping addiction once upon a time. This brought it all back. The bills began to pile up as my online shopping became a real problem for my wife and I financially. I started seeing the looks of disgust and annoyance on her face when she talked to me, and I realized I was ruining our marriage with my constant needs for these perfect new things, which were clearly meant so specifically just for me. But to be honest, it wasn't just that. There were problems long before that. The buying habit was just an escape, I had begun to realize. Still, I couldn't let her take that from me. She began to want to cut up my credit card and wanted to cancel it, but I told her no. Then, very soon after that, new ads started to appear when I was browsing on the laptop. Ads for shovels, for lye, for dark clothing, flashlights, spades, pickaxe, grass seed. Strange, I thought at first, since we didn't even live in a house with a backyard. Why was it making such odd recommendations all of a sudden? Looking at the laptop more closely, I realized why the algorithm had my desires wrong suddenly. It wasn't synced to my Google account, it was logged into my wife's profile. But why would she buy those items? Gardening tools don't make a lot of sense when you don't have a garden or a yard. I opened up the history tab, going back and seeing what she'd been looking at, but strangely the last 24 hours were white blank. She was still out at the grocery store, so I pulled up the bank statements and her credit card account, overwhelmed with the desire to find the truth. Like an itch in my mind that I couldn't help but scratch. When I logged into my Google account and tried to follow the money as they said in the movies, I couldn't help but notice new ads dominating the borders of my computer screen. Learn self-defense now. Put on these new Nike running shoes and go outside. Go. And then finally, Bob's Gun Store. You can't put a price on safety. The last one was nearby, so I decided to quit browsing the internet and get out of the house. After all, the only thing I could find in our bank and credit card history was a big cash withdrawal the day prior. It hadn't been me, so only my wife could have taken the money out, but why? Part of me wasn't surprised when I saw her car parked out of the gun store. She was so transfixed by her new purchase that she didn't even notice me as I drove past, gawking at her. She was holding a large pistol and stroking it thoughtfully. Christine always said she hated guns, and I guessed maybe she had changed her mind. I drove for a long time after that, more afraid than I'd ever felt in my entire life, terrified of the woman I married. A couple hours outside the city, my phone started to ring. I pulled over on the gravel shoulder and fished my Google Pixel out of my back pocket with my shaking hands. Looking at the screen, it was a video call from Christine. She was wondering where I was. Swiping up on the screen, I saw her face appear, and seeing it made me feel like I had been wrong about everything. Like it had been a big mistake, and she'd never do anything to hurt me. "Hey, where are you? Are you driving?" I asked, seeing the background of her video call, and she looked to be on a country road. "Yeah, of course. I was worried sick about you. I pulled up your GPS data on your phone because you didn't come home for dinner. Where are you going?" Of course I'd forgotten about that. She knew my passwords and could track my phone. "Tell him to stay where he is," a man's voice said in the background. "Stay where you are. I'm coming to get you." She was coming to get me, all right. Christine, whose voice was that? The call suddenly cut out as her stunned face seemed unable to come up with a response for my question. I'm browsing my phone now, looking for a motel where I can spend the night, and the prompted ones keep popping up for a place in Mexico. I think maybe I should listen to Google this time. Alright guys, that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed, please press the like button. Let me know in the comment section what you thought. Links to the two, stories where I found them on Reddit will be in the description down below at the top, so check those out. And yeah, if you enjoyed, subscribe, turn on notifications, all that good stuff. Hopefully I'll see you guys next time. Don't get anyone pregnant. If you do, make sure they're hot. I'm out. Peace. Hey guys, it's Scrubby back again with another spooky video here. You guys seem to really like these, so here's another one. You guys know the drill. Like and comment if you want more. It helps them do better, and let's go. A good friend of mine told me this story years ago. He's the stereotypical old big bad trucker. I've seen some weird stuff with him while driving in South Texas along the border, and he never even batted an eye. But while telling me this story, he had goosebumps and a concerned expression. Which, from this guy, is about the equivalent of trembling lips and poop-stained pants. I'll tell this first story in first person as he told it to me. Years ago in the late 90s, I was on my way from the house, heading to Loretto to pick up a load. It was early in the morning, around 4 or 5, and I had just come off a string of days at home, so I know I wasn't tired. I'm on one of those 2-lane winding roads in the absolute middle of nowhere when I see something on the side of the road at the edge of my high beams. At first, I just thought it was roadkill, as it usually is. As I get closer, I see that it is roadkill, and there's something crouching over the carcass. I remember thinking this is either a guy taking the antlers as a trophy or he's just a sicko. As I got closer, I can still now see that this guy's eating the deer. He's pulling chunks of meat from the stomach and bringing it to his face, and at this point, he stops mid-motion and looks at me. Not my truck, but at me. He, or whatever it was, stands up, and that's when I see that it's a huge thing covered in brown hair. And I remember thinking at this point, oh my god, this thing is standing on a tiny shoulder looking at me, eating a deer. By this point, maybe 3 seconds have passed, and I'm about to point in the road he's standing at. I didn't even think of stopping. In fact, I'm starting to lay it on and get the hell out of there. As I'm passing it, it's looking at me. Again, not at the truck, it's looking through the driver's side windshield at me. He obviously has the intelligence to know that there's a driver in there, and he knows where I'm sitting. And as I start to pass him, I can still see its head above the hood of an old needle-nose Pete, which is an old truck design where the hood goes straight out from the windshield. Being tall and difficult to see around is what it's known for. This thing is giant, and I remember seeing what looked like human intelligence in its eyes. It scares the crap out of me, and to this day, I don't really know what it was. I actually haven't told anyone this because I think I imagined it, but I've been having nightmares about this, so I think I need to get it off my chest. I was hauling lumber on 36th East between Fortuna, California and Red Bluff, on my way to the 5 South. This was in 95 or 96, right before the coastal lumber industry folded. Route 36 is basically a glorified logging road. It twists through the mountains, ranges, and goes to one lane several times. Anyways, I got a late start, which was okay, as I liked driving at night anyways. It was probably around 10 or 11, and as I crept into the mountains, there started to be a nasty bit of fog. I rounded a corner and suddenly there were all these deer just standing in the middle of the road in the fog. It was kinda creepy just seeing them all standing there in the middle of the road because usually they're running across it, not just standing there. I blew my horn and they all turned and looked into my headlights, their ears twitching, the buck's antlers casting long, twisted shadows into the fog. I blew my horn again and they lazily walked to the side of the road. I idled forward towards them and I looked out my driver window and saw the bucks and does warily looking back at me as I drove through them. But that wasn't the creepy part. I reached the peak and started back down. The fog on the eastern side started to abate, but as I rounded the corner, I saw a guy walking down the road. Down the middle of the oncoming lane with his back to me. He had a shoulder-length black hair, wet and stringy from the moisture that had been in the air. He wore a faded blue wool-lined jean jacket, hands in his pockets, and darker jean pants. When my lights hit him, he swerved to the shoulder of the lane, giving me room. But then the most horrifying thing happened. I was going maybe 25 or 30 at this point, but as I came up to him, he bolted right in front of my truck. The last thing I saw was his eyes, wide black eyes, and his mouth open in a silent yell. A black pit in his white face shining into my headlights before disappearing under the horizon of my hood. I stood on the brakes, the cab and the trailer behind hopping. I remember thinking, Jesus, 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 as I hopped out of the cab and ran back behind the truck. I saw him walking back up the hill, behind my truck, hands in his jacket pocket, illuminated by my red brake lights. He looked back at me, his black eyes and black mouth now grinning toothlessly. Then he dashed into the trees at the edge of the road. I was so scared I didn't call out. I just got in my cab and drove on. I still dream about those wide eyes and that unholy mouth disappearing under my hood. I hope the dreams stop now. I want to preface this by saying that I'm not making this up, I'm not a writer, and I'm not embellishing, and I don't care if I get internet points for it. I'm not a long-haul trucker, but this happened during a long drive at night about 14 years ago. 4 friends and I decided to drive out to Weatherford, Texas to look at some new Hondas at a dealership after they had closed because we were stupid high school kids and didn't understand the concept of trespassing. The ringleader of our group drove us in his 96 Honda Civic. We took the 730 south towards 180. Around 20 minutes into the drive with no lights, houses, or other vehicles in sight, his CD player turned off mid-song. No one touched it and he didn't have controls on the steering wheel. We all thought it was weird, but nothing paranormal. He turned it back on and we completed the drive. After looking at the cars, because the dealership was off the highway, we left to head back to our hometown, and then we ended up taking the reverse route back, this time north up 730. We started joking about the possibility of aliens and what if that was what caused the CD player to turn off, and about 2 minutes later, around the same spot as before, it happened again. This time, it went from music to static. At the same time again, and I'm not making this up, a black human-shaped figure materialized out of one of the bushes in the highway, walked into the road in front of our car, and I remember the light from our headlights illuminating the space around him, but not the figure itself, like it was absorbing the light. There was no shadow that I could see. This was not a guy in a body morph suit. It was like looking at a 2-dimensional cartoon of the blackest color you can imagine, and it was reaching its arm out at us. We were going about 55, 60 miles an hour, and we had to swerve to avoid it, and I remember as we passed it that it had no distinguishing features. No face, no fingers, no clothing, no shape, other than a dark void. We all screamed at the top of our lungs and almost went off the road completely. After our driver regained control, we sped off as fast as his car could go, carrying 5 people, and we had to calm him down so we wouldn't wreck. We were all freaking out, asking each other what to verify, to verify that it wasn't a hallucination. We all saw it. We all had the same experience, and when we got back to our town, we all just stood in shock and didn't know what to say or how to explain it to anyone or if we even should. There were no reports of anything near it encounters on the news, nor were there any reports of a body turning up in the area or a homeless guy harassing people or really anything. I'd forgotten about that incident for many years until a few months ago when I was hanging out with one of those friends and I asked him if he remembered that. He does, and we still have no idea what it was. I was driving my flatbed from St. Helena, California to Wiley, Texas. This happened somewhere near the Texahoma border. I picked up a hitchhiker. He was standing by the side of the road with a trembling thumb out. Trembling from the cold, I thought? Soon I would realize that it was trembling because of the fear. The trembling of the man who looked as though he'd seen a ghost definitely shook me a little bit. Where to, I asked. Please, I know this is weird, just take me to a bar. I need a drink. I will buy you a drink or a hot sandwich, I just don't care. Get me there. I thought this was odd. I picked up many hitchhikers in my day, and such a request was never asked. As I was about to say, get lost, buddy, whatever you're selling I'm not buying. I looked into the man's eyes and saw pure terror. Something compelled me to open my passenger door for the man, and he entered. At the bar, the hitchhiker began his tale. Earlier on the night of torrential rain, he was a hitchhiker seeking a ride. Next to the road, he sat with his thumb out for hours, waiting in the rain. A few cars passed, but none slowed. Frustrated, the hitchhiker was about to rest his thumb and find shelter for the night, and then he saw headlights. Headlights of a very slow approaching car. The hitchhiker eagerly approached the car, waiting for it to stop. Oddly, the slow-moving car continued drifting forward. Maybe the pace was slowing or the car was moving at such a low speed, but it never came to a complete stop. The headlights pierced the rain, and as the hitchhiker stood confused, will the car stop? Maybe I'll get in. I've never seen a car drive this slow. Anyways, the hitchhiker decided to try to just jump into the car. He stumbled to the rain as he pulled the passenger door and had a seat. To his horror, there was no one in the driver's seat. There was no one in the back seat, and the car was bare, but it just kept moving forward. The headlights still on, but now in front of him as he looked out the windshield as the car continued to creep forward, the hitchhiker, scared, quickly exited the ghost car and ran for miles. He rested, ran some more, rested, and then ran some more, and finally, after catching his breath, stuck his thumb out and stood by the road. The hitchhiker then saw headlights, but this time the car was driving at a reasonable pace, and it wasn't a car at all. It was a flatbed truck, and that's where him and I had just met. I had seen no other cars on the road that night. My dad told me and my brothers this story when we were growing up, and it's always stuck with me, particularly on long drives when I'm feeling a bit sleepy. The first time I remember hearing it was after I asked him if angels were real. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. He drove trucks decades ago, before I was born and before labor laws were around and brakes were more standard. I'm assuming it's different now, but I'm not too sure. He'd fairly regularly accept calls that would extend his shift where he was driving 24, 36 hours or more without a break longer than a quick bathroom or fast food stop. My dad has a pretty mathematical brain, and he's the type to make up logic puzzles out of something totally mundane just for fun. Whenever we were driving around town, he'd regularly ask me things like how long it would take us to get home from the store if we were going 30 miles per hour but had to stop for 5 minutes in the middle because a family of kittens were crossing the road. He'd come up with similar equations for himself while he was driving solo that involved things he was seeing like the odometer, mileage, markers, all that stuff. One night, after already driven a particularly long day, he noticed his eyes getting droopier, and the whole roll down the window and blast the music up thing didn't seem to be helping much either. It was a rainy night on a pretty windy mountain road without a shoulder to pull over safely, so he started doing those logic games out loud to keep himself alert in the wake, saying something to the effect of, I just passed mile marker 146, so what time will it be if I reach 200 if I'm going 55 miles per hour? Then closed his eyes, took a breath, and felt his head do the nod jerk thing which woke him up with his gasp. He opened his eyes to see he was driving straight towards mile marker 158, which would have sent his whole truck tumbling down a random mountain ravine. He was able to correct the course safely, but it was a matter of seconds between reality and certain death. He insists to this day that he slept through 12 miles of windy road going 60 miles per hour, only to wake up right at the last moment between life and death. The story usually ends with him tearing up. I don't know if there's angels, but I know there's something bigger going on in this universe than our human brains have been able to understand yet. If I hadn't have woken up right when I did, you kids wouldn't be here today, and that feels pretty close to spiritual. Anyways, guys, I think that's going to do it for the video. Hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, I'd appreciate you pressing the like button, letting me know in the comments section down below what you thought. I promise longer videos are going to be back soon. Just, felt like making another spooky story for you guys, and yeah, don't get anyone pregnant if you do. Make sure they're hot. I'm out. Peace.
To be completely honest with you, there isn't much that I wouldn't do for $1 billion. I wouldn't like burn down an orphanage, you know. I wouldn't go up to an orphan, take it away from them and say, what are you gonna do? Tell your parents for $1 billion. But outside of that, there isn't really much that I wouldn't do for $1 billion. So, when I saw a story about an art theft in which thieves got away with over $1 billion in stolen artwork, I knew that I had to talk about it, because that's the type of mystery that intrigues me, okay? It's got everything. It's got a getaway car. It's got acrobatics. It's got people dodging lasers. I'm pretty sure at one point I saw Scooby-Doo in the gang trying to crack the mystery themselves. I can't verify that, but I'm pretty sure that I saw it. Fred really looks like he does meth now. And yeah, today we're going to be talking about the Dresden art heist, so get ready to enjoy Conspiracy Corner. Let's get into it. It's a beautiful day in Dresden, Germany, as you look around your European vacation. It's November 25th, which means back home, Deborah is probably being hit on by Uncle Bill, and that's why you don't go home to Alabama for Thanksgiving anymore. You've decided to spend this Thanksgiving abroad in Dresden, Germany, studying to be an art major. Okay, alright, I don't really know if I can do a backstory. It's November 25th in Dresden, alright? And Dresden has this place known as the Green Vault Museum, right? You know, and anytime you have vault and museum in the name, you know they keep in fancy stuff there. And this was the type of museum in vault that kept the really fancy stuff. Like, you wore a suit to go see all the jewels and whatnot that they had, okay? I get it, jewel, cause like jewels, you know? And keep in mind, this museum is located in a castle. Like, this thing should have been secure. And inside this vault, right? Inside this ancient vault is sitting 49 karat diamonds, gold, you know, all this massively fancy stuff, 16 karat diamonds, diamond studded sword hilts, 700 smaller diamonds, like literally basically enough to make a little pump chain is sitting inside this vault in the Green Vault in Dresden, Germany. And all the security people are sitting there cocky like, ayo bro, look at how dope our security system is. It's gonna be almost impossible for anybody to get in here and steal this stuff, man. They start, you know, playing iMessage games, they're playing cup pong back and forth. Well, little did they know that they were in for the finessing of a century, because a couple of master thieves, Sly Cooper style, started doing something on the outside. So at 4 a.m. on November 25th, there's a small fire that starts on a bridge relatively close to the museum, right? And the fire, it isn't massive, but it's enough to destroy a power box that happens to feed some of the power to this Green Vault Museum. The power outage that comes from this little fire, you know, it turns off some of the security alarms, it turns off some security stuff, but the security cameras keep working, so the security guards don't really notice that the security system's gone down, because hey, if the power goes out, but the cameras are still working, you'd assume that it's all still working, right? So the security guards are sitting in the office, and they're like, hey, look, our security system's still up, our closed circuit television's still working, we're golden, nobody's gonna break in, the alarm would go off. Well, thanks to this power outage, there's one window that's in the vault room that actually is no longer secured. And thieves come in and cut through the iron bars at this window and then break in through the window into the jewel room, where they're now with $1 billion worth of stuff. And the weirdest part about this is cops have come out since and said that the hole that they squeezed through in this window is insanely small. Like, it might have had to have been a munchkin to be able to squeeze through the hole that they were able to squeeze through. But regardless, there's closed circuit television of two thieves in the vault smashing these displays and just stealing everything that they can get their hands on, right? They're like, oh my god, we didn't think this was gonna work. We're gonna grab everything as fast as humanly possible. So they're grabbing everything, throwing it in the bag, and this is on closed circuit television. The thieves get away with, as I said, almost $1 billion worth of jewelry, because
They get away with a bunch of 18th century jewelry sets, 37 parts with rubies, diamonds, all of that stuff. They don't take everything. They left some behind. But they take one diamond that alone is worth 10 million euros. Like, they get out like bandits. They get out of the window and replace the bars in order to confuse everybody. This team is so cracked, all right? These kids have done so much Adderall, they've drinking so much G Fuel thanks to Code Scrubby, that they get noticed and detected by guards at 4:56, right? And they broke in at 4:50. It took them 6 minutes to break in, completely case the joint, and steal $1 billion worth of stuff. And this all happens in the span of like 9 minutes. From the time that they broke in to the time they're discovered and the first police officers arrive is about 10 minutes, and they get away. Like, they get away. I guess the way that the museum is situated, it's super easy to hop in the freeway and get away. So they get away with $1 billion worth of stuff. So 16 police cars arrive at the museum, right? And they're like, oh my God, this is insane. They've stolen $1 billion worth of stuff. Put up roadblocks. Roadblock everything in. They shut down basically every way out of Dresden, from 4:59 onwards. They set up roadblocks around Dresden and basically say no one is getting out. They shut down the city to try to find these guys. But these thieves were so prepared for them to put up a roadblock, so prepared for what the cops are going to do, that literally the getaway car that they were in is an Audi A6. The cops find the same Audi A6, identical, in an underground parking garage on fire, meaning that the robbers had switched cars and probably gotten out of town before the roadblock was even set up. So, this team is so prepared. They were so ready to commit this heist that they are capable of getting in and out of the museum in 10 minutes and then getting out of the city, ditching a car and burning it efficiently to the point where they beat the time it takes for the police to set up a roadblock. Like, this is not an amateur team worth of people, And when I'm seeing this for the first time, I just have one question, which is, well, how are they going to make money? Because if they stole all these crowns and massive diamonds and all of this incredibly famous artwork, this incredibly valuable but famous stuff, there's no way that they're going to be able to sell it because people are going to know. Like, if I'm buying a crown and I say, wait a second, this looks a lot like the crown that was stolen from the museum, I'm not an idiot. It's probably the crown that was stolen from the museum. And this is where I'm starting to believe that maybe world famous robbers are a thing. I'm just not in that world. I guess they stole all this stuff. It's worth $1 billion as is with historical value. But even if that they broke down the material, like they broke the diamonds into smaller pieces, they melt down the gold, they do all this stuff, it is still worth up to $200 million just for the materials that this stuff is made out of. While Americans are getting ready for Thanksgiving on November 25th, somebody out there has just stolen $200 million worth of gold and diamonds and 100% gotten away with it. Like, it's been well over a month at this point, and the only developments that have come in terms of the investigation is that the police feel like they needed to offer a 500,000 euro reward to anyone who can step forward. And when the cops start offering, a massive reward for any help, it's probably not because they're doing too hot. Meaning that whoever did this, whoever perpetrated this, actually might have gotten away with $1 billion crime. And I think what's really shocking to police officers, the reason that they have literally no progress, they have no names, they have nothing, is because it was so perfectly done. There was no mess ups. They burned out the car that they drove away in, switched cars, didn't leave any IDs, didn't leave fingerprints, put the window back that they had broken in to get out into the building, like with gloves on, so there's no DNA, there's no lead for the police. And that makes a lot of people wonder, though, did they have somebody on the inside? Because I don't know about you, I consider myself a pretty smart guy. I don't care how long I practiced or watched a museum, there's no way I could get everything to go off flawlessly that well. Which makes a lot of people wonder, What in the heck is going on? How were they able to know exactly how to light a power box on fire across the street to turn off the security system? How did they know that that window wouldn't be visible to break into very well on CCTV? Like, there's just too many things that make it very, interesting how they got in there so easily. We're talking about thieves that get in and get out with 5 minutes without having ever been inside the vault before. There's just no way. And the fact, like I said, that they were able to knock down the electrical grid for a specific portion just enough so the security cameras would still work and that way the guards wouldn't think anything crazy was going on definitely shows that you are not dealing with any amateurs here. Regardless, the police have absolutely no leads, and I highly doubt that they're gonna get them because I feel like if you're smart enough to pull off $1 billion heist, you're probably smart enough to keep your mouth shut and not get yourself caught. But yeah, that is the Dresden art heist. That's literally all the information that is public right now. If anything else happens, I might do an update video. I know this isn't a conspiracy in the normal way of like the Illuminati, but there's gotta be something deeper at play here. There's something bigger going on when people are getting away with $1 billion heists, alright? Or maybe that's just a conspiracy theorist in me. If you guys enjoyed, be sure to press the like button. I did put some new merch up on the website. It's no joke, no scam. So if you guys want to check that out, go for it. If not, that's fine too. I hope you guys have an incredible day. Turn on notifications if you don't have them on already. Today's notification shout out goes to Logan Skinner. Big thank you for having on notifications. I appreciate you. If you want a notification shout out, turn them on. Send a screenshot to my Twitter at Scrubby_69 or my Instagram at Scrubby. And yeah, don't get anyone pregnant. If you do, make sure they're hot. If you enjoyed this conspiracy video, I am going to be doing another channel with just conspiracy theories. I'll put it in the pinned comment. And I'm out. Peace. See you tomorrow. Don't get anyone pregnant if you do, make sure they're hot.